The dust from the red earth of the Kimberley was biting into my face, but I didn't blink. I stood there, a 14-year-old girl with nothing to my name but a battered cardboard suitcase held together by twine and the lead rope of a single scrawny cow. My family, my own flesh and blood, had just kicked me to the curb. They'd taken the station, the homestead, and every memory of my mum, leaving me with this animal as a cruel joke. They didn't know it yet, but their greed had just planted the seeds of their own bloody downfall. I gripped the handle of my suitcase, the cardboard damp with the morning dew. It had been only 3 days since we buried my mum, Elena. 3 days since my world turned the color of a leaden sky over the paddock. My stepfather, Rick, and my uncles, Matt and Bruce, were lounging on the veranda of the big homestead, laughing. I stood in the yard, unable to wrap my head around what could possibly be funny. Rick was holding a stack of papers. He claimed they were documents Mum had signed to protect my future while she was fading away in that hospital bed. She'd trusted him until her very last breath. "Alana, come here," Rick said, his voice trying to sound kind but rasping like coarse sandpaper. I obeyed, my tattered boots barely making a sound on the dirt. I was 14, but the ache in my chest made me feel like I'd lived a century. My uncles watched me with cold, calculating eyes. They were Mum's brothers, but there wasn't a trace of her warmth in them. "Your mother was very clear about her wishes," Rick continued, waving the papers. "She knew a young girl couldn't manage a massive cattle station like this." I frowned, my heart thumping against my ribs. "Manage what?" "This is my home, my dad's land." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Matt, the eldest, spat a glob of tobacco onto the dust. "Your dad's been gone a long time, kid, and this land belongs to the blokes who actually work it now." A chill crawled up my spine. "Mum told me everything would be mine," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "She said Rick would just help me run things until I was older." Rick let out a short, dry laugh. "Your mum was confused by the meds, Alana. The truth is, she owed us a lot of money. Me, your uncles. The debt is settled with the property." It was a lie so massive the air seemed to vibrate with it. Mum was a saver, a proud woman. She'd never have put my inheritance at risk. "That's not true," I said, my voice trembling. "You're lying." Bruce, a massive bloke with hands like shovels, stepped forward. "Watch your tongue, girl. We're being generous. We could have kicked you out with nothing at all." I backed away, seeing the sheer malice in their eyes. A dark, oily greed I'd never noticed before, or maybe I just hadn't wanted to see it. They'd planned this. All those constant visits while Mum was dying, the closed-door meetings with Rick, the papers they made her sign telling her they were just hospital receipts. They'd waited for the exact moment I was orphaned to strip me bare. "You can't do this," I said, my voice a thin thread. "It's already done," Rick said, his fake kindness vanishing. "The papers are signed by a solicitor. This station, the Outback Reach, doesn't belong to you anymore." I looked at the house where I was born, the stables my dad built, the old ghost gum tree where Mum used to read to me. Everything was fading away. "Where will I go?" I asked the gray sky. Rick flicked a cigarette butt into the dirt. "Not our problem. You're young, you can find work, but not here." He lit another one, watching me like I was a pesky March fly. The smell of cheap tobacco and stolen earth made me want to heave. "Get your gear. You've got 10 minutes, Matt ordered." I ran to my small room. I didn't have much. Some worn-out clothes, a photo of my parents on their wedding day at the local hall, and a small rag doll. I stuffed it all into the old suitcase. Tears fell onto my shirts as I folded them. Outside, I could hear them already arguing over how they'd split the herd. They hadn't even waited for me to leave. They were dingoes, waiting for the lion to die so they could tear into the cub. I walked out with the suitcase in one hand and my doll in the other. The sun was trying to poke through the clouds, but the cold wind was winning. Rick, Matt, and Bruce were waiting in the yard, looking at me with pure disdain. I held my head high, even though I was falling apart inside. "Wait!" Rick called out. I stopped. Was there a spark of humanity left? A final moment of regret? He walked over to the holding pens where the dairy cows were kept. He opened the gate and pulled one out. She wasn't the best in the herd. She was a brown and white cow, neither fat nor thin, with one horn slightly twisted. Her name was Gypsy. Mum called her that because she always seemed to be dreaming of other paddocks. Rick tossed the lead rope at me. So no one says we're cruel. Your mum was fond of this beast. She's your inheritance. My uncles burst out laughing. One cow. Out of 200 head of prime cattle, out of thousands of hectares of fertile land, they were giving me a single cow. The humiliation burned in my cheeks, hotter than my tears. I looked at Gypsy. She looked back with big, liquid eyes, chewing her cud calmly, oblivious to the human rot surrounding us. "Take her and bugger off," Bruce barked. "If we see you around here again, we're calling the coppers. This land isn't yours, get it?" I didn't answer. I took Gypsy's rope in my free hand, a girl, a suitcase, and a cow. I turned my back on the outback reach and started the long walk down the red dirt track. I didn't look back. If I did, I'd shatter into 1,000 pieces. I could feel their eyes boring into my back, their laughter following me like crows over a carcass. The road was endless. Gypsy walked beside me without a fuss, as if she understood we were both outcasts. The wind picked up as we hit the open plains. I had no idea where I was going. The nearest town, Dusty Creek, was miles away, but I had no family there. The townies respected Rick and my uncles because they had money. No one would believe a 14-year-old story. Hours passed. The afternoon sun began to dip, staining the sky a bruised orange. My feet ached in my boots. My hands were numb from the cold and the tension of holding on to everything I had left. Gypsy let out a soft, low bellow. She was hungry and thirsty. I sat on a rock by the roadside and finally let myself sob. I cried for my mum, my dad, the home I'd lost, and the cruelty of men. I cried until there were no tears left. Gypsy nudged me gently with her head, a quiet comfort. "Just you and me, Gypsy?" I whispered, stroking her velvet muzzle. "We're all we've got." Night fell like a heavy, dark blanket. Fear started to set in. The sounds of the bush, once familiar, now felt threatening. The distant howl of a dingo made me jump. We had to find a spot. I led her away from the main track, looking for any kind of shelter. I found a small creek, the water running clear and cold. I knelt and drank with my hands, the icy water soothing my dry throat. I found a stand of thick mulga trees near an old, collapsed stone wall. I tied Gypsy to a sturdy branch and opened my suitcase. I pulled out the only blanket I'd managed to pack, a thin woolen, one that still smelled of Mum's lavender soap. I sat on the hard ground, huddled against the stone wall, and wrapped myself up. Gypsy lay down close to me. The massive animal's body heat was a godsend against the biting chill. Hunger started to gnaw at my gut. I hadn't eaten since a bit of dry toast in the morning. I remembered Mum sitting with me in the kitchen, teaching me how to make cheese. "The secret is patience, darlin'," she'd say, stirring the big pot. "And love. Everything tastes better when it's made with love." Mum had been a master cheesemaker. Her fresh wheels were famous in Dusty Creek. People came from all over to buy the Reach cheese. That thought hit me like a physical blow. Gypsy was a dairy cow. She had milk. I looked at her in the darkness. I didn't have a bucket. I didn't have anything. I rummaged through my suitcase, nothing. Then I spotted an old, rusted tin can near the stones, probably left by a fencer years ago. I scrubbed it with sand and creek water until it was clean enough. I approached Gypsy nervously. "I'm gonna need your help, girl," I murmured. I'd watched Mum milk 1,000 times, but I'd only tried it a few. My small hands were stiff with cold. It took a few tries, but finally, a warm stream of milk hissed into the bottom of the tin. I worked slowly, patiently, just like Mum taught me. The tin was small, but I filled it to the brim. I sat back under the trees and looked at the frothy white milk under the moonlight. It was a miracle. It was food. I drank slowly. It was warm, sweet, and tasted of life. It was the most delicious thing I'd tasted in days. I stroked Gypsy's neck in thanks. That night, pressed against the cow's warmth, I didn't feel quite so alone. My family had taken everything, but they'd unknowingly left me the source of my survival. Dawn woke me. I was stiff and sore, but alive. The sky was a riot of pink and gold. I milked Gypsy again, drinking my fill. I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to keep moving. But where? Dusty Creek was out. Rick's influence was too strong there. I had to go further, somewhere no one knew my face. I remembered the ringers at the station talking about a bigger town on the other side of the range called Udnadada. They said it was a place of opportunity, with a big market and folks from all over. It was a 2-day trek, maybe 3 at the cow's pace, but it was a goal. "Let's go to Unadada, Gypsy," I said, untying the rope. "Let's find a new life." The second day was brutal. The sun beat down at midday, and the track was a dust bowl. My feet began to blister, but I was a bush kid. I could endure. I focused on the rhythm of my steps and Gypsy's steady plodding. I forced myself not to think about Rick. Thinking about them only brought rage, and I needed my energy for the walk. I thought about Mum instead. I remembered her singing while she worked old bush ballads about lost loves and distant lands. "Life's gonna give you a hiding, Alana." She'd told me once while mending a dress. "It'll hit you hard, but you're like the red clay. The blow can either break you or mold you into something stronger. You decide." "I'm gonna be strong, Mum," I whispered to the wind. "I promise." That afternoon, disaster nearly struck. We were crossing a narrow stretch of the track with a steep drop-off. Suddenly, a brown snake sunning itself on a rock felt threatened. The dry rustle of its movement sent Gypsy into a panic. She bolted sideways, losing her footing on the loose scree. She slid down the slope, dragging me with her. I screamed as I fell, the rope searing my palms. We tumbled a few meters down the incline. It wasn't a deep gorge, but it was steep and full of jagged rocks and spinifex. I slammed my arm hard against a boulder. Gypsy struggled to stand on the unstable ground. Ignoring my own pain, I scrambled toward her. "Easy, Gypsy, easy!" I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. She was terrified, eyes rolling. One wrong move and we'd both tumble to the bottom. I gripped the rope tight, digging my heels in. "Come on, girl, up you get." I used the same firm tone my dad used to break in colts. Gypsy, hearing the authority in my voice, calmed. She dug her hooves into the earth and heaved. I pulled with everything I had, my arms screaming in protest. Inch by inch, we scrambled back up to the track. We were both shaking, covered in red dust and scratches. I hugged her neck, my heart hammering. "We're okay," I gasped. "We're okay." We kept going, though I was limping and my arm throbbed. As the sun set, we spotted an old, abandoned, corrugated iron shed on a ridge. The roof was half gone, but it was better than a tree. We sheltered inside. I was starving, milk wasn't enough anymore. I looked at the photo of my parents. My dad, tall and grinning. My mum with her bright eyes. I remembered when Dad died in that tractor accident. I was 10. Rick, the station foreman back then, started being real helpful to Mum, bringing her wildflowers, fixing things around the house. Mum, lonely and vulnerable, married him a year later. I never trusted him. There was something in his smile that never reached his eyes. "He's a good man, Alana," Mum would say. "He's helping us." "You were wrong, Mum," I whispered. He wasn't a good man. The rage felt better than the hunger. He hadn't just betrayed me, he'd spat on Mum's memory. And my uncles? My own blood. How could they laugh while I walked away? I promised myself I'd never forget those laughs. One day, I'd show them. The next morning, I woke with a new fire. Hunger sharpened my senses. As we walked, I scavenged for anything. I found some bush tomatoes and ate them raw, bitter, but they gave me a spark of energy. Udnadada had to be close. I had to find that market. If Mum taught me one thing, it was cheese. And I had the milk. I just needed a place that would let me work. We reached the outskirts of Udnadada at dusk on the third day. I was buggered, starving, filthy, and exhausted. The town was bigger than I'd imagined. Bitumen roads, painted houses, and people everywhere. They looked at me with curiosity, a ragged girl with a cow and a suitcase. Some looked with pity, others with suspicion. I felt tiny. I headed for the edge of town where the houses were humbler. I found a park with a cattle trough. I let Gypsy drink and splashed my face with water. I sat on a bench, lost. I needed to sell tomorrow's milk to buy food, but who'd buy from a grubby kid on the street? I walked toward a small bakery, the smell of fresh bread stopping me in my tracks. I looked through the window and saw an old bloke with a thick white mustache pulling trays of meat pies and sourdough from the oven. The smell was so intense I felt dizzy. I stood there, tears welling up just from the scent. The baker saw me. He came out the back door. "What are you doing here, kid? You all right?" I backed away, startled. I was just smelling. "I'm going." The man looked me up and down the suitcase, the cow, the dust-caked clothes. His face softened. "Hang on," he said. He went back inside and returned with a paper bag. "Here, these are yesterday's rolls. Hard as rocks, but they'll fill a hole." I took them with shaking hands. "Thank you, sir. God bless you." "That your cow?" he asked, wiping floury hands on his apron. "Yes, sir. This is Gypsy." "Well, she looks like a decent milker." "You milked her yet?" I shook my head. Nowhere to do it. The man thought for a second. "Look, I've got a small holding pen behind the bakery. Used it for goats once. You can put her in there tonight. There's some dry lucerne, and you can sleep in the flour shed. It's warmer than the street." The relief was so massive I nearly buckled. "I don't know how to thank you. Name's Arthur. Don't worry about it. But tomorrow morning, I want a liter of that fresh milk for my coffee. Deal?" "Deal," I said, smiling for the first time in days. That night, eating a stale roll that tasted like heaven and listening to Gypsy chew her cud, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe Unadada was the place. I slept deep on the flour sacks, the smell of yeast and sugar in the air. I woke before dawn. I milked Gypsy into a clean pot Arthur lent me. I gave him his liter, and he took a sip, nodding. "Bloody hell, that's rich. Best milk I've had in years." He gave me fresh bread and a bit of cheddar in return. I stayed there for 2 weeks, helping Arthur out sweeping, washing trays, minding Gypsy. He was a kind, quiet man who'd lost his wife and had kids over in Perth. One day, Arthur said, "Market day's today. Why don't you try selling the rest of the milk? You've got more than I can use. Take these glass bottles. Go to the square, stay near the veg stalls. Watch yourself, though some folks are dodgy." I went to the market, a whirlwind of noise and color. I felt overwhelmed. I found a spot near an old lady selling kwandongs and honey. I put my bottles down and waited. People passed by, but no one stopped. I felt invisible. Then I remembered Mum. She never waited for customers. She called to them. "Fresh milk, straight from the cow." I tried to shout, but it came out as a whisper. A lady in a wide-brimmed hat stopped. "Is it good? Not watered down?" "It's pure, ma'am. Very creamy. My cow eats well." The lady sniffed it and nodded. "I'll take a bottle. How much?" I hadn't thought of a price. $5? I ventured. She paid me. My first sale. I felt 10 feet tall. Within an hour, I'd sold 3 bottles. $15 in my pocket. I ran back to Arthur, showing him the cash. "Told ya," he grinned. "Good product always sells." I tucked the money into my boot, but I knew milk wasn't enough. To get ahead, I needed to do what Mum taught me. I needed to make cheese. But I needed a kitchen, big pots, salt, and a press. A few days later, a regular customer named Mrs. Higgins asked me, "Your milk is lovely, dear. You wouldn't happen to know how to make a fresh farmer's cheese, would you?" My heart leapt. "Yes, ma'am. My mum taught me. She made the best in the Kimberley." Mrs. Higgins clicked her tongue. "I knew it. I'd buy every wheel you could make, and so would half the town." "I don't have a place to make it," I admitted. "You need a proper setup. I know someone, an old woman named Mrs. Miller. She's a bit of a hermit, lives on a run-down property on the edge of the scrub. Folks say she's a bit mad, but she's got an old dairy shed that might suit. Tell her Brenda Higgins sent you." I took Gypsy and headed for the scrub. The property was fenced with weathered timber, the gate hanging off its hinges. Inside was a small stone cottage and a dairy shed. I knew it the moment I saw it. It was the place from my dreams. An old, rusted press sat outside, and copper pots were turned upside down. I approached the cottage. "Mrs. Miller?" I called out. An old woman, thin as a rail, with hair like silver wire, stepped from the shadows. Her eyes were dark and piercing. "What do you want, girl? Get off my land!" Her voice was like gravel. I backed up. "Sorry, ma'am. Mrs. Higgins sent me. She said you had this place." Mrs. Miller walked over to Gypsy, examining her dental work and her coat. "Good beast," she muttered. "And you say you can make cheese? I'm 70, girl, too old to be minding orphans." "I don't want a handout. I want to work. I can clean that shed. I'll pay you rent in cheese. 2 wheels from every batch." The old woman stared at me, reading my soul. She saw my bruised arm, my blistered feet, the grit in my eyes. "The world's full of bastards, kid," she said softly. "They'll eat you alive if you let 'em. You gonna let 'em?" "No, ma'am," I said. "Chin up." She grunted. "The dairy hasn't been used in 20 years. It's full of spiders and snakes. Pots are tarnished. Press is seized. I'll scrub it. I'll fix it. I just need a roof and a fire." "Fine. You can use the shed. Sleep in the tack room. It's better than a bakery floor. Gypsy can go in the back. Paddock grass is thin, but the bore water's clean. Deal? Deal." I ran back to Arthur's to get my things. He was happy for me. "Don't forget your old baker," he said, giving me a bag of rolls. I moved into the refuge, as the old sign said. It was perfect. The work was backbreaking. I scrubbed the stone floors with ash and water. I polished the copper pots with wild lemons and salt until they shone like the sun. I greased the rusted press with sheep fat until the screw finally turned with a groan. Mrs. Miller watched me from her veranda, never helping, but never stopping me. At midday, she'd bring me a tin of cold tea and a sandwich. "Eat up. You won't last long on an empty stomach." On the 4th day, the dairy was ready. I lit the fire under the big copper pot and poured in Gypsy's rich, yellow milk. I felt Mum's presence in every move I made. I measured the heat with my finger, added the rennet, and waited. When the curd formed, I cut it into perfect squares. The sweet, acidic smell filled the shed. Mrs. Miller stood in the doorway. "That smell," she whispered. It had been decades since that scent filled her home. She remembered her own husband and son before the drought took them and the bank took their spirit. She saw me, not just as a kid, but as a legacy. She took a slice of the first batch. She chewed slowly, her eyes closing. A single tear tracked down her wrinkled cheek. "Not bad," she said, her voice gruff. "Needs a touch more salt. But my mom used to make it just like this. Keep doing it that way." I took my first 3 wheels to the market. Mrs. Higgins was waiting. I asked for $20 a wheel. "$20?" Mrs. Higgins shouted to the crowd. "That's a steal for this quality. This is real station cheese, folks." In 15 minutes, they were gone. I had $60. A fortune. Orders started pouring in. Within months, I was the cheese girl of the scrub. I bought 2 more cows with my savings. Mrs. Miller and I became a team. She taught me about bush medicine and how to read the clouds for rain. She wasn't mad. She was just guarded, like me. One day, a bloke in a fancy Akubra hat approached my stall. "I'm Frank Sterling," he said. "I own 3 steakhouses in Adelaide. I tried your cheese and I want 50 wheels a week. I'll pay double what you get here." I felt dizzy. 50 wheels? I looked at Mrs. Miller. She nodded. "We can do it," I said. But as I shook his hand, I didn't see a scrawny bloke watching me from across the square. It was Jacko, an old ringer from the Reach who'd been sacked for being a drunk. He couldn't believe it. The kid they'd kicked out was now a boss lady selling to city blokes. Envy curdled in his gut. He hopped on the next mail truck back to Dusty Creek. He found my Uncle Matt in the pub. "I've got news, Matt. News about your niece. She ain't starving. She's rich. Got a cheese empire in Oodnadatta. Seems that worthless cow you gave her was a gold mine." The news hit like a thunderclap, Matt told Rick and Bruce. Their station was failing, Rick didn't know cattle, and they'd gambled away the profits. "That money belongs to us," Rick hissed. "That cow was station property. We were just loaning it to her. She's stealing from her family. We're going to Unadata. We're taking the cow and the cash." They drove up the next market day. I was setting up when a shadow fell over me. "Well, look at the little orphan, all grown up." I froze. Rick. He stood there with Matt and Bruce, looking me over with oily grins. "Family visit, Alana?" Rick said. "We heard you're doing well." "Too well." "Where'd you steal the startup cash?" "I'm no thief," I spat. "You are." Bruce stepped forward. "Shut it, you ungrateful brat. We gave you that cow out of the goodness of our hearts. And since she's our cow, this cheese and that cash in your tin are ours." He reached for my money box. "Don't touch it," I shouted. A crowd gathered. Mrs. Higgins and Arthur were there, faces grim. Rick tried to grab me. "You're coming home, Alana. You're a minor, and I'm your guardian. Finish that sentence, you piece of work, and you won't leave this square on your own 2 feet." Mrs. Miller had stepped up, her heavy walking stick held tight. "I'm Isabel Miller, and this girl is under my protection. Now bugger off," the crowd murmured. Everyone knew Isabel Miller, the woman who'd fended off the banks with a shotgun. Rick was losing the room. He lunged for me, but Isabel's stick cracked across his wrist. He howled in pain. Several ringers and butchers from the market surrounded them. "Get lost, mate," a big butcher said. "We don't like bullies in this town." Rick, clutching his wrist, looked at me with pure venom. "This isn't over. I've got the papers. I'll be back for my property." They retreated, but we knew it was a hollow promise. We bolstered the refuge with new locks. That night, Isabel pulled a double-barreled shotgun from under her bed. "I don't like this," she said, "but I like cowards even less." They came at 2 a.m. I heard the snip of wire cutters. My heart nearly stopped. I woke Isabel. "They're here." She was alert in a second. "Stay in the hall," she ordered. I heard them outside. Bruce was at the stables, trying to rope Gypsy. Rick was breaking into the dairy, looking for the money. I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed a heavy iron bar and ran to the stables. "Leave her alone!" I screamed at Bruce. He laughed and grabbed my arm, but I swung the bar, catching him in the ribs. He groaned, but pinned me against the rails. In the yard, Rick came out of the dairy with my cash box. "I've got it, let's go." But then Isabel's voice rang out, cold as a winter frost. "Freeze, you thieving bastards." She stood on the veranda, the shotgun aimed right at Rick's chest. Rick froze. "Don't shoot, lady. We're just taking what's ours." The light on the veranda was blinding. Bruce still had me by the arm. "Touch her again," Isabel whispered, "and I'll send you to hell." The sound of police sirens wailed in the distance. Someone in town had seen their truck and called the coppers. Rick panicked. He dropped the box and tried to run, but 2 patrol cars skidded into the yard, blocking the gate. "Hands up!" Rick, Matt, and Bruce were tackled into the dirt. Rick started screaming, "It's a mistake! I'm her stepfather! That old bat's kidnapped her!" "Liar!" I shouted, stepping into the light. "You stole my home. You kicked me out with nothing. And now you're trying to steal the life I built." The sergeant looked at Rick, the broken dairy door, and the cash box. "Right. A guardian who breaks in at 2 a.m.? Pull the other one, mate. Take him away." As they were loaded into the back of the paddy wagon, Rick yelled, "I've got the deeds! You'll rot in a home, Alana." The sirens faded. I leaned against Isabel, shaking. We'd won. Frank Sterling, the Adelaide bloke, sent his best lawyers to help me. It turned out the papers Rick made Mum sign were a total fraud. The solicitor who witnessed them was Rick's cousin. Under the pressure of a real law firm, he cracked. He admitted the signatures were forged after Mum had already passed. The court case was a landslide. Rick, Matt, and Bruce were sentenced to 15 years for fraud, theft, and assault. The Outback Reach was legally returned to me. I went back to the station once. It was a ruin, the gardens dead, the house trashed. It didn't feel like home anymore. I looked at Isabel, Arthur, and the friends who'd come with me. "Home isn't these walls," I said. "It's the scrub. It's the refuge." I sold the Reach to a young family and used the money to build a world-class dairy at Isabel's place. We became Miller and Morales Dairy. Gypsy lived out her days as the queen of the paddock, never having to work again. Years later, I received a letter from prison. Rick was dying. He didn't ask for forgiveness, but he wrote, "The cow was always yours. Your mom made me promise. I'm sorry." I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt peace. I walked out to the paddock and stroked Gypsy's gray muzzle. "You did it, girl. We did it. I never married. My life was full, my station, my cheese, and the family I chose. I became a legend in the outback, the girl who started with a suitcase and a cow and built an empire out of red dust and sheer bloody grit.